Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the 2023 Hack Summit. And it's our privilege today to be joined by Lily Liu, who's the president of the Solana Foundation. And she's going to give us an incredible fireside chat with Roshan Patel, who's a partner with us at Hack VC. Lily, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Lily, it's great to do this fireside chat with you. I'm sure it's one of the more anticipated ones today. But before we get into Solana, I figure we'd start maybe a little bit about yourself, maybe a brief background, and how you got into crypto broadly.
Yeah, sure. I guess it's been ages now, but I first heard about crypto in the fall of 2013 when I was living in Shanghai. For myself, I started off, I was originally supposed to be a doctor, kind of like fell accidentally into the business world, working at Morgan Stanley, McKinsey, and KKR in the US, especially in the US, and then in China. And then I moved back to China in 2011 to do my first startup, which was not tech related at all. I was building private hospitals in China, which was, a really challenging experience. And then through some friends, I started talking about Bitcoin. Probably like a lot of people, it's like pretty intense scam, right? 2013. And then I decided to look into it a little bit, read the white paper, and because I'm not a computer scientist or anything like that. First time I read it, I didn't fully get it, but it's like, okay, there's something really real here. And for me, because I had been living in China for a while and I'd studied a lot of Chinese history, was thinking about like such a contrast to the way societies are governed and run today. So this whole idea that you'd have this decentralized economy, like governed by its participants, was just wild, right? And so that really piqued my interest. And then I started working at that time it was just Bitcoin. Started working on that when I was still in China, and then I guess it's been crazy to say almost 10 years. I first heard about Bitcoin. So that's how I originally heard about it. And then I moved back to California, met this guy, Balaji Srinivasan, interested, like small handful of people and he had this pretty distressed situation on his hands called 21, which was flying high as a Bitcoin miner before it got totally offsides in terms of liabilities in the first bear market I was part of. So we got ourselves out of that, turned it pretty, unexpectedly from Bitcoin mining company to earn.com, which is micropayments in Bitcoin for minutes of your time, which was, I guess, a pretty unique pivot. And then we sold that to Coinbase in 2018. That was kind of like my first tour of duty, if you will, in crypto. And then since then, done a number of other things. And so one of the things I work on these days is Solana.
Awesome. Well, that's a very complete background. Thank you for that. Now transitioning to Solana. So maybe can you help us walk through, like for people that might not understand what the Solana Foundation really is, like what the role of Solana Foundation is broadly and, in the context of Solana itself, that would be super helpful.
Totally. So there's Solana Labs and there's Solana Foundation as two entities that do a lot within Solana. Certainly not the only ones, but those are the two that I guess have Solana in the name. Solana Foundation is responsible for. I shouldn't say responsible for because there's many entities that work on these things. But Solana Foundation primarily sort of focuses on growing the ecosystem. Like many of these crypto foundations, it is a nonprofit and has, a treasury of tokens and thinks about how do we use that resource base to grow the community, the adoption of Solana as the Solana network, and explore, some of the unique use cases that can help that adoption grow. And then Solana Labs has the original sort of core client team, and then also builds projects, for-profit projects and products using Solana. So for example, maybe some people have heard about Saga, which is the mobile phone that Solana Labs is launching. That's on our Solana Labs, Solana Pay, right? Those types of sort of applications. Some of those are being built out of Solana Labs. So that's kind of like relatively foundation, what Labs does. You know, for me, I think, and this doesn't just apply to Solana, I think that, you know, to me, the role of foundations in these L1 communities, I think is more akin to kind of being like the mayor's office of the city. So if I take a step back, you know, a lot of people sort of who work in crypto come from a corporate background, and therefore sort of map the sort of mental model of how a company works and the corporate sort of flywheel onto crypto. But I actually think it's not a very logical fit. And so, you know, when you come from the corporate world, the model that works there is you hire workers, build a product for users that help you generate a profit to pay back your shareholders, and then, you know, onwards we go. Right? That's worked out really well. It's a really successful model, a very scalable model. Okay, great, right? But to me, an L1 is actually a little bit more like a special economic zone, in that it's essentially sort of like this fallow block space, right? Once you have the network working, okay, great. But then, you know, how do you take that fallow block space and make it more like, you know, a Shenzhen type of city rather than, you know, some plot of farmland in the middle of nowhere, right? And if you're trying to take a special economic zone type of like, you know, I remember seeing these old pictures of Shenzhen in the 1980s. It's basically just swampland, right? And then it looks a little bit different today. And so, so to me, the role of the Solana Foundation, and then I think foundations more generally in L1 land, is to be that mayor's office that transitions that city in the most successful case from swampland to metropolis, right? Which means that first and foremost, you need to have like a general idea of like, okay, how's that going to work, right? Like, what are the comparative advantages of this city and the literal model, like the geography, this, you know, the economic ties, like the trade routes, that type of thinking. Okay, so what are the advantages that the city is going to naturally have, and how do we attract those people? But critically, you're not attracting workers to create a product for users to generate profit. Really, you need to be attracting producers instead, to, you know, build the banking system, and also importantly build, like, you know, the coffee shops in the city, right? Because otherwise it's not actually a city, and particularly if you're a general purpose L1 of industries, if you will, to come and populate your city. So to me, the role of the Solana Foundation, yes, it's, you know, we've talked about functionally sort of what we do or what we think we should be doing, but more philosophically, I think that's really the role of a foundation. I think it's more of like a mayor's office of a special economic zone.
Yeah, I absolutely love that analogy. I think, yeah, I haven't heard of that actually applied to a foundation, but now that you said it, it makes a ton of sense. And I think you touched on a lot of like, you know, what the goal is, what the idea is. Now maybe we dig in a little bit more of like the how, and like sort of the way it works. And the first thing that comes to mind is because, you know, with these blockchain networks and L1s at the core of it, you really need developers. Hack Summit is a developer focused conference. And now there's like a world of a lot of different L1s and L2s you could be working on across the board. So particularly for Solana, being this mayor office, this foundation, how do you think about motivating and competing for this builder attention and getting them to come to this special economic zone?
Yeah, and so so I think that, you know, when you think about attracting producers to your city, right? To me, there's also a little bit of progression there. So first, you've got to have a network. If there's no network, there's literally nothing to do. It doesn't exist, right? And then the most productive skill set in crypto land is developer. And users to even. And so oh, all right. All right.
Yeah, Lily, whatever you need
Oh.
to do to make the video better. We lost you a little bit there, but Yeah, if you need to cut off video,
Yeah.
that might not be a bad idea, and we can just have a chat.
Yeah. Okay. I think video. I'm trying to turn it back on. Just one. Okay. It says the camera is back on, but it doesn't actually. It's not actually back on. So here, let me try that again. All right. Why don't I just try video off for a second? Maybe that'll work better. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you pretty well. So
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
this is
Yeah. It's
just to confirm though, we missed a little bit of the beginning of like that like maybe like 10% in we got there. So if you want to rewind a little, that helps.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Sorry about that. So I think, okay, so there's, with no network, there's nothing for anyone to do. Blockchain doesn't exist, right? And then the sort of most productive class of builders, certainly where we are in crypto today, is with developers, right? Because no developers, there's nothing even for creators to do, and without some combination of developers and creators, then there's no reason for users to be there. Oh, I'm back. Okay, and so that's kind of, I don't know if hierarchy is the right word to use, but that is a little bit, in my mind, the hierarchy of needs. And I think that's kind of where we are in crypto, is we're still all very much at the developer layer, right? And so in terms of types of developers that the foundation is trying to attract, I think like the real breakout, this is before I got involved with Solana, but I think like the real breakout experience for Solana really was the club, the ability to do clubs. I'm trying to was extremely distinctive at the time at 2020, and also brought in that kind of application space, brought in a new crop and a new kind of talent pool of developers, right? Largely from the Chicago crowd, and really kicked off kind of this new kind of wave of DeFi innovation.
And real quick,
and so
Bob is a centralized limit order book.
Yeah.
Just for people
Central limit order book, right? And so the critique has always been automated market makers. XYK originally is essentially an implementation for managing liquidity pools when you have insufficiently performant chains, right? Because the more efficient way of using liquidity is basically bid and ask, and the way traditional markets work. But until you had a performant chain like Solana, you wouldn't be able to process those transactions quickly enough in order to have a usable market, right? And that's where we came up with AMMs, Uniswap, and XYK. And so the advent of clubs on chain for Solana was distinctive. I also think it's worth noting that FTX is the one that built that. So there was a time historically when FTX was committed to non-custodial applications. And then that changed in probably sometime in end of 2021. So as an aside, for me, it's always been a little bit of a litmus test of people who are really sort of, in my mind, heart and soul in the right place in crypto and in it for the right reasons are fans of self-custody. And for me, people that are not fans of self-custody I think that's actually really the binding value of L1s that like to snipe at each other, right? That's something everyone agrees on, as an aside. Anyways, and so that was I think really instrumental to Solana getting a lot of traction, and also bringing in a very unique and new, right? And if Solana kind of on-ramped that developer talent, then that developer talent is very high quality, is going to be loyal to Solana. And I think that's pretty much what played out in 2020 and 2021, right? In terms of verticals, sort of clearly beyond DeFi, because in my mind, if you're going to be a general purpose L1, you've by definition got to have more than one application vertical. Otherwise, you are de facto an app chain, but you've made all the trade-offs of the general purpose L1, and that's not a great place to be, right? And I think we saw that with some of the projects that did a lot of big headline deals in 2021. But in my mind, when you are a general purpose L1, you inherently basically like are, you know, the value proposition to developers in one manner of speaking is to say, okay, we'll abstract all of the complexity of managing a validator set and, you know, and the economic security, and we aggregate economic security, and then you can focus on sort of the product layer, the smart contract layer and above, right? That's basically the implicit sort of trade-off, right? Which allows you to have a lot more people sort of at higher levels of abstraction than running validators, dealing with that whole thing, which is something the foundation spends a lot of time on, and that's like part of the trade-off. So that you can sort of have a greater diversity of developers, and ideally sort of have a proliferate across a different number of verticals. So in my mind, DeFi is necessary for all of the other application verticals to be successful, right? Because, you know, liquidity in crypto, and part of what, you know, you can argue what how much of this bootstrapping phase versus like, you know, future sort of reality for all these apps. But like, you know, if you're earning in-game items today, a huge part of it is because they're liquid, right? And you have these digitally native ecosystems. So in my mind, you know, DeFi is essential for all of the others to do well. I think that another one that I, you know, think is really interesting and also sort of at the root of a lot of sort of creativity to come, is NFTs moving from being application to NFTs being more infrastructure, right? And so we saw this with, let's call it fungible token land, with Bitcoin application as infrastructure, and then Ethereum clearly moving way beyond that. And now everyone else is, you know, blockchains are infrastructure for applications rather than the applications themselves. And so I think that's also like very definitively where NFTs are moving, right? We're like 2 years beyond, I think, the Beeple auction at whether it's like Christie's or something like that, where everyone thought like NFTs was just art and more like a high quality, a high res scan of, you know, physical art. Okay, so we're far beyond that. But then I think NFTs, as if NFTs are going to be infrastructure, then from a technological standpoint, there's like quite a few demands on them, right? And so what I think is pretty cool about what Solana is doing is in the same way that Solana's like, okay, you know, people are really into DeFi, and then let's push the frontier on that, and, you know, demonstrate the performance of the chain in terms of clubs, right? So we just launched something, or just announced something a couple of weeks ago called compressed NFTs. It's really a compression that can go way beyond NFTs. But the idea is that we basically drop the cost of minting NFTs by about 99% by putting a lot of metadata into Merkle trees that then confirm state on the chain, right? And so that's a pretty big deal, because NFTs on Solana were already way cheaper than elsewhere. But now, you know, so like Drip House, they do like 100,000 NFTs every week, and it used to cost them $10,000. And I think they just did it for a couple $100 the other day. So that's a pretty big deal, not just because it's cheaper, right? But because cheap and fast means you can do more and do more different things. So Rush and I were just talking about, you know, like Netflix, for example, in 56K modem days. I believe they started in 56K modem days, and then they were mailing DVDs back and forth, right? So yeah, you could say like, you know, making access to entertainment easier for all, sure, like same company, but really different application space than streaming, developing content, and like really, you know, revolutionizing like the way we all consume content. And so I see that, you know, somewhat similar way, right? You're going to explore like the whole creative space of NFTs as infrastructure, not just as application, then it has to be performant. There's just like no other way around it. So I think that's really exciting. And that opens up not just NFT stuff. And right now we think about it as like PFP land or like token gated communities, maybe. And then there's like, you know, people thinking about, you know, sold on tokens, credentials in your wallet, and all that type of stuff. And I think you need basically affordable technology for that, not to mention for games and so on and so forth. So I'm pretty excited about that. And all like the sort of more creative and consumer spaces that get opened up with that. Another vertical that I personally am really excited about, because I've always been a little bit more of like a DeFi person, and kind of like financial use cases person, is I think also just quite simply payments. I remember like people have been writing about payments in blockchains on Bitcoin Talk since like the very, very early days. And I remember when I first got involved in Bitcoin, we were always talking about like, Visa-like network and the billion transaction roadmap. That was like the famous 2014 post from Gavin Andreessen that never came to be. And so funny enough, like 15 years into having Bitcoin, crypto is really bad at payments. And it's because up until now, we didn't basically have something like USDC, because still like people think about things denominated in dollars or something in like those types of amounts. Okay, and then you also has to be fast and cheap, and it also has to be like truly programmable. And so we just didn't have anything that was fast, cheap, organic developer community until basically Solana, right? And so I'm pretty excited about that, because I think that there's like if DeFi Summer and all that type of stuff was like the trade as being kind of the core unit of transaction underlying like trading based DeFi. I think what can also complement and supplement that is something where the payment is kind of that core unit of transaction underlying things like e-commerce, trade finance, right? And frankly, like much more actual relatable use cases, which is not just like degen trading or NFT floor, like all that stuff that probably I'm sure Roshan you know and love.
Yeah. No, of course. That was a really well thought out and thorough answer. Unfortunately, I think we're at 5:30 right now, and the chat's
oh my gosh, we're already at time.
Yeah,
okay.
we ripped through that. I was gonna ask some more follow-up questions, but we're a little tight on time. But Lily, you have a Twitter, and it'll be shared on the summit. I'm sure there's a lot more things that people can research into Solana. Some of the stuff you talked about. Oh, here comes Ed. This was a great talk. I wish we had like 2 hours. It could be its own summit.
Yes, and I want to echo Roshan's thoughts. Thank you so much, Lily. We learned a lot from you today, and big admirers of all the accomplishments you've made to forward the Web3 ecosystem through Solana. So thank you for being with her for us today.
Yeah,
and
thanks so much for having me. Yeah. Sorry about the technical difficulties as well.
Totally understandable. And if you enjoyed what you learned today from Lily, please consider donating to charity at hacksummit.org. And also, if you're an engineer looking for work, feel free to apply for a job at hackjobs.org, and we'll try to help you out with a startup that's hiring. So coming up next is going to be a very special session, and you're not going to want to miss it. I don't want to spoil the surprise, so I'm going to go ahead and bring the audience there to that session now, and we're all going to get in